Now I can get married and be confident I could take care of my family because I saved in Bitcoin. And when I understood it, its purpose was to bring us back to a sound hard money standard, then the whole Bible took on new meaning, and all these scriptures came to mind. I go, oh my gosh, this is what God was talking about when he was talking about fair weights and measures. And in that moment, I realized there's a connection between sound money and righteousness in society. A lot of people who grow up outside of Christianity, they never had an experience with objective truth.
Before we dive really deep into the connection between Christianity, the Bible, and Bitcoin, I always like to try to start with the basics. And the basics always starts with like, why do we do stuff? And we cover a lot on this podcast, why Bitcoin? Like over 69 episodes, like this is the 69th episode now. So we covered it, I think, well. But what we didn't cover well on this podcast is why Christianity? Why are you a Christian? And then after that, we can go into the connection between the Bible and Bitcoin. So why are you a Christian?
So just go. We're recording, not?
Definitely.
Okay. Good. Why am I Christian? That's a very, very good question. And so there's a long version, there's a short version, there's a medium version. I'll give you somewhere in between. Essentially, the main reason I'm a Christian is because Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And if you read in the Bible in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the Apostle Paul tells us, if Christ has not been risen from the dead, I think it's chapter 15, don't quote me, it's in there somewhere. He says, if Christ is not risen from the dead, then we are a people most to be pitied, and our faith is in vain. Now that's a strong statement. That's a very harsh thing even to say. And basically what he's saying is this, look, excuse me, if Jesus Christ is still dead, then the whole world should pity Christians. Like, we are what he's saying is you are literally wasting your life if Jesus is dead. If Jesus of Nazareth didn't rise from the dead, being a Christian is the most foolish, stupid waste of life you could commit yourself to. Why? Because he's dead. Imagine going around and preaching about this man from Nazareth called Jesus who did miracles and all this stuff, and the main hinge of his message, of validating his message, is that he rose from the dead. That's the whole thing. His whole ministry, he went around preaching, teaching, healing, and all this kind of stuff. And the main thing he said, I'm going to die, and then on the third day, I'm going to rise from the dead. If he doesn't do that, if he only does half of it, if he only dies, then this whole thing is a complete waste of time. But if he actually did rise from the dead, then this is the most important thing in the world. So Jesus leaves us with a choice here. You can't, basically, Jesus set it up like this. You can't be in the middle. Either this is the most important thing ever, or it's the biggest waste of life ever. There's no in between. It's not set up that way. So the reason I'm a Christian is because I believe in my heart Jesus rose from the dead. And, there's lots of evidence to suggest this. I've went through the apologetics, and truthfully, for me, there is no other explanation that makes sense of the evidence we have, other than the fact that, man, he's alive. He's actually alive. He really did it. No other and I've thought on this for hours and hours and hours, laying my head. I couldn't tell you how many hours going to bed. I'm thinking, I'm trying to poke holes in it. Okay, well, maybe this happened, or and I cannot find an explanation that makes sense to me other than he's alive. And so for that reason, I'm a Christian. I serve the Lord Jesus Christ because there's no other choice now. It's, like in Bitcoin, when you see it, you can't unsee it. There's no going back. And in Christianity, once you understand he's alive, there's no going back. There's no going back. So that's why I'm a Christian.
That's an amazing reason. And do you also see a connection between the? I mean, there's obviously a big difference, and the Bible and Bitcoin are different things in general. But do you see a connection between the origin story of Bitcoin with Satoshi Nakamoto? We don't know who he is. There's a really nice legend to it. There are like books and books about it, who he might be, but nobody knows for sure. And with Jesus Christ, is there like? Do you see there's some similarities, or do you see some things that are important for Bitcoin that have also are also mentioned in the Bible?
Well, the Satoshi question is interesting because there's like different extremes people have. There's one extreme sometimes I get on Twitter comments about Satoshi is the second coming of Christ. I'm like, well, no, he's not. um, and then the other extreme is like, who cares about Satoshi, right? Um, of course, there's similarities in the narrative. Now, the interesting thing is like Satoshi, nobody knows who he is. I think there's a reason for that. He disappeared. I think there's a reason for that. I don't really think I'm not one to think it's a sort of a supernatural thing. I think there's a good natural explanation about Satoshi. I mean, like you said, there's this legend around him, and it's probably better that way because it adds this mystique and this mystery, and it's more fun that way. Let's put it that way. But the way I see Satoshi in general is, I really think there's a natural thing here. I think Satoshi was a guy who probably worked for the government at some point, broke away, created this thing, and then disappeared because he knew. It's interesting that he disappeared right around the time with the WikiLeaks and that kind of stuff. And he's like, guys, pump the brakes. We don't want the government. It's too small right now. Like, let's just. And then he disappears. Like, I don't think that's a coincidence. I think he's like, okay, they're on to us. I better disappear. My work here is done. That's my personal view of it. I think he's just a guy who's like, okay, I'm done with this. I have to be done with this. Let's see what happens now. I could see him sitting back somewhere going, whoa, it actually freaking worked. Like, this is crazy. Because I don't think Satoshi was created Bitcoin and was like, yep, this is going to succeed. I just know it. It's. I really think he just did it, and he's watching it, going, wow, I can't believe this thing's working. This is wild. It's taking on a life of its own. It's almost like like a child. You make this child, and then next thing you know, he's out on his own, and you go, wow, he's actually making it. This is kind of cool. So that's the way I see it.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing when you think about Satoshi Nakamoto left so early on. Usually, if you build something, if you do anything in life, you have to really care for it. Even with a child, you cannot create a child and then after 1 year you're like, go on the street, go out in the world. Then you will find your way. I mean, maybe it works because maybe someone sees the child and picks it up, but yeah, I mean, kind of this is what happened with Bitcoin, right? He left the child out. It was not ready, maybe for it being out, and someone else picked it up and was carrying it away. And this was maybe the reason why it still lives on, because it has no master, it has no voice, it has no one that oversees it, no one that has like the control over it. Bitcoin would be so different if we wouldn't know Satoshi Nakamoto, and if Satoshi Nakamoto is on podcasts and stuff. It would
Yeah,
be so different, and that's an amazing thing that we don't have this right now here. And it's
yeah,
also ties back a little bit to Jesus Christ, because he's also not on podcasts. We know, like we obviously there are things written down, but he's not now alive, and he's not now in like the world present, like on podcasts like you and me. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
So there are things that, in common, and I also see some connections in between there. And then before we get into the connection between the Bible and Bitcoin, did you were always a religious person? Did you always in Christianity? Is this something that came from you from your when you were small and just you grew up with it, or was there like something in your life where like then you found it?
yeah. I grew up in a nominally Orthodox home. My family's from Romania. We left Romania in when it was 80, right before, a couple, maybe 6 or 7 months before communism fell, we left. So we missed all the fun. But we left, came to Canada, and grew up in a very nominal Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox home. Never went to church, maybe for a wedding or a baptism or something. But that was it. There was no Bible in my house. There was no, uh, you know, my parents never shared Bible stories. We had icons on the wall, Mary and stuff. That was it, though. So, when I became a teenager, I said I was an atheist, but, deep down, I still thought, there's got to be something. But I lived like an atheist. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I really wanted to just dig in and get to the bottom of this. And I knew there was something special about Jesus. Like, I studied Islam, I studied Buddhism, I studied different religions. And the one thing that kept popping up is this Jesus in every one of them. And he was like a very special character in each religion. Even in Islam, Jesus is a very unique character. Even in Islam, he's the only prophet, even in Islam, born of a virgin. Why? What's so special about him that even Islam, honors? I mean, the only woman named in the Quran is Mary, his mother. Why? What's so special about him? So I had to discover, okay, I had to get to the bottom. Who is Jesus? I have to figure this guy out. And when I did, I was like, wow, he's Lord. I have to serve him. And in a sort of lesser way with Bitcoin, it was the same sort of thing. I went on a journey where I said, okay, what is Bitcoin? Because every 4 years, it keeps popping up, these crazy price rallies, and I got to a point in 2020 where I had a similar experience where I said, I have to get to the bottom of Bitcoin. I have to figure it out. I have to know what it is. And if it's not for me, it's not for me. At least I know. So I went down that rabbit hole, and well, here I am, I figured it out, and I was like, wow, Bitcoin is something special. And it's an I was talking with a friend yesterday, and we were saying, look, Bitcoin is, I think Greg Foss says something along the lines of, you only get one asymmetric trade in your lifetime. But Bitcoin seems like it's a once in a century opportunity. This is a wealth transfer. This is an opportunity that I don't know human beings will see another one like this for a couple hundred years. And I thank God that I was able to. I thank God that He gave me an obsessive personality to where once I cling to something, I have to figure it out. Because if that wasn't my personality, I would have just been like, who cares? So to answer I don't know how we ended up here with Bitcoin, but to answer your question, no, I did not grow up religious. I found Christ in my early 20s, and through the research and the investigation.
Yeah, everything ties back to Bitcoin somehow. It's like, I don't know if you have this experience when I'm talking in not about Bitcoin. It also like, oh, I want to get Bitcoin in that conversation, but I usually try to not do it too much
Yeah.
because people are resisting that a little bit. Now let's get into and I asked that question if you were religious before, because in Bitcoin I knew that you were not born a Bitcoiner because Bitcoin was not
Right.
there when you were born. Even though I don't know how old you are, but probably you're older than Bitcoin. So you discovered Bitcoin at some point, but you also discovered Christianity at some point, and that is really interesting. Where do you see now? And you wrote a book about it, the Bible and Bitcoin. Where do you see now the connection between the Bible, Christianity, religion in general, and Bitcoin?
I think Bitcoin is this is the sort of, I don't know if this is a paradox. Maybe I'm using that word incorrectly, but maybe I'm not. Bitcoin is sort of a paradox because it's a new technology, but somehow this new technology is bringing us back to the ancient ways. If you get what I'm saying, because in the ancient days, in the biblical days, all they had was sound money. All they had was silver and gold, and if you go even further back, cattle and different grains and stuff. But by the time you get to the time of Jesus, it was silver and gold coins. That was the money. They had a sound, hard money standard. That's all they knew. They didn't really have a fiat standard in the times of Jesus. So Bitcoin being the most sound money there is ever, it's taking us back to the ancient ways of sound money. Now, I know that sounds maybe that sounds silly to some people, but we've lived in this very small sliver of time with fiat money. It's not been really that long when you take the whole history of humankind into consideration. We're in a very small sliver of this paper fiat money experiment, if you will. And it hasn't taken very long for it to expose itself as not viable for the long term. So Bitcoin, through this new revolutionary technology, is bringing us back to the ancient days. And so when I was listening to the Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean, he mentioned I forget where it was in the book, but maybe somewhere at the beginning or the middle, he mentioned about the Emperor Nero, and how Nero he did a thing called coin clipping, where they would clip the coins and melt down the clippings and inflate the money supply, and the coins would become smaller and smaller. And that was a form of like ancient inflation or whatever. And he said that that was the beginning of the fall of Rome. And it clicked in my mind. I was like I had this experience where in a moment I understood. Tyrants inflate money and destroy civilizations. And Nero was one of the most brutal persecutors of Christians, one of the most evil emperors, who would kill Christians and light them on fire and throw them to the lions. And so then I had these thoughts of like Justin Trudeau in Canada. I'm like, oh my gosh, all the tyrants, all they do is inflate money and destroy and hate Christ. So I said, and in that moment I realized there's a connection between sound money and righteousness in society. And that was really the light bulb moment where I said, okay, I wanted to understand Bitcoin. My journey was, I have to understand Bitcoin because I'm obsessive and I have to figure it out or else I can't sleep. But what I was really looking for was not to understand Bitcoin, it was to understand money. Why? I thought I wanted an answer to the question, what is Bitcoin? But what I really needed was an answer to the question, why is Bitcoin? What problem is it solving? Why was it created? What's its purpose? And when I understood it, its purpose was to bring us back to a sound hard money standard, then the whole Bible took on new meaning, and all these scriptures came to mind. I go, oh my gosh, this is what God was talking about when he was talking about fair weights and measures, and that old commandment, you shall not steal. I didn't grow up in a very Christian home, but I at least knew you shall not steal. I knew about that one. But that commandment, you shall not steal, took on whole new meaning. Because to me it was like, okay, don't steal from your neighbor, don't take his, wallet or whatever. But that it ended there. And what this journey in Bitcoin helped me do was expand that definition to theft is a lot more cunning than just swiping your neighbor's wallet or something. Theft happens at institutional levels. Right? When Nero was clipping coins, that was theft. When the governments print money, this is inflation, this is theft. Taxation, this is theft. And then it was like, boom, the floodgates were open. And I knew at that point, I saw it, I could not unsee it. For me as a Christian, Bitcoin now had become a moral imperative. And when it became a moral issue, then what choice do I have as a Christian? I have
Absolutely.
to speak the truth about it.
And it's funny how Bitcoin brings back or shines a light on those traditional values. I see so many Bitcoiners having those traditional values, and I talked with, I think, 10 podcasts ago with the guy from Sad Saver who has 8 kids.
Hmm.
And he talks about how Bitcoin influences that thinking about kids and making yourself into the world, and how Bitcoin influences your thinking of traditional values and conservatism and all those stuff. And then it's interesting how we are not going forward in time. We're more like going backwards on a sound money standard, but with a new technology, because
Mm.
gold was a good sound money, but gold was not ready for our digital economy. So we had this hybrid solution with fiat, which was then completely deleted by gold. And now we're bringing the sound money system that is tested over time back with Bitcoin. And this is something beautiful once you understand that Bitcoin is not, oh, a new experiment we are starting now. No, it's a tested system on technology railroads that are now functioning.
Yeah.
And this is completely changing the view. And this is also explaining why not all the 15-year-old people are in Bitcoin, but also the 50, 60, even 65-year-old people are into Bitcoin, because they get what Bitcoin is once they get the technology side. Some don't get the economic side, some don't get the technology side, and people who get both sides, they get Bitcoin. I always
Yeah.
see it like there's some software developers, they're like really, they understand, they grasp why Bitcoin functions technically, but then they're like, it's deflationary, we need inflationary money and stuff like that, because they don't get the economic side of it.
Yeah.
And I'm curious now, because you had Christianity before, and you were in, and then you discovered Bitcoin. How did Bitcoin, additionally to Christianity, change your view of the world? Was there anything that was completely changing the way you think about stuff with Bitcoin?
Bitcoin helped me. Um, how can I say this? Uh, so I always had hope about the future. Even as you see everything around you go to crap, I always had hope. Okay, I'm clinging to Christ. He's risen. He's alive. He's going to win. He has the victory. He's the king. So I had this hope. I still have this hope. But I didn't know. I always had this maybe not confusion, but a conflict within me of I knew even before Bitcoin, I knew that the money was broken. I used to say things like the dollar is backed by bullets, that it's fake, it's not real money. But when people would ask me, like we had a Bible study early in 2020, and this is kind of was part of the journey where we went through this, and I said, all right guys, like it's clear, it's obvious that the money's broken. It's an evil system run with demonic principles. um what do we do? As a Christian living in this system, how can you just not use money? Do we live off the grid? Do we become Amish? What do we do? How do you live as a faithful Christian in a system that's so glaringly evil? And we went back and forth, and nobody really had a good answer. And I didn't have a good answer either until Bitcoin came. And I'm like, oh my gosh, because I prayed, Lord, give me an answer. Like, this is a conundrum we're in here. And next thing you know, I'm exposed to Bitcoin. I hear the Bitcoin Standard. I listen to the book, The Bitcoin Standard. I go down, and I'm like, wow, I think this is the answer to my prayer. I think this is a system where it honors God, his principles. It's not evil, it's apolitical. I think this is it. And I brought this to the church. I said, guys, check this out. Half of them said, you're crazy. Some of them even left the church. This was crazy to me. I remember talking to a guy, and I said, hey, and I was trying to be gentle, right? I said, I think like fiat money, dollars are evil. And he goes, how could you say that? are you saying we're all participating in evil? I said, well, I don't know if I would say you're participating in it so much. Well, I wouldn't say you're participating in it. You're a victim of it. This has been imposed on you. Nothing you can do about it. And I'm not going to call a victim a perpetrator. But let's face the facts. It's evil. It's built on debt. The whole thing is a system of debt. He left the church because he got offended. I'm like, what are you serving, Fiat? Like, what the heck's going on? So, anyways, long story short, I lost my train of thought. What was it again?
The original question was, how did Bitcoin change your view of the
Oh,
world?
yes. So what it did was it gave me a righteous alternative that I could opt into. And what I've seen happen with even those in my church who have adopted Bitcoin in their own life with their own finances. So our church, we have Bitcoin on our balance sheet. And a lot of people in the church have followed suit. And I never told anyone to buy Bitcoin. Never. They did their own research and they come to their own conviction and they bought it. Just so everyone knows, because some people are accusing me, you're going to impoverish your church. No, I never told a single solitary soul, go buy Bitcoin. I just said, here's what it is, make your choice. So what I'm seeing in others is a different optimism that wasn't there before. Young people who are saying, wow, now I can buy a house because I saved in Bitcoin. Or now I can afford this car because I saved in Bitcoin. Or now I can get married and be confident I could take care of my family because I saved in Bitcoin. So and it's happened in my life too, where you see everything getting more expensive, and sometimes I go down my Facebook feed and it's so depressing because people are saying I can't afford a house, I can't afford this, I can't afford that. But when I'm looking at my savings, everything's getting cheaper. And it gives you this optimism for the future, like, hey, we're winning, like there's a better solution, and it's godly, it's a righteous solution, it's a good system. It's based on mathematics and honesty and integrity. You don't have to trust, there's no government involved. So there's this optimism that comes with Bitcoin, where even in the highs and even in the lows, you're so optimistic all the time, because in the lows you buy more, in the highs it's high. So that's I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but there's this tangible optimism now where it's not so much where I'm saying, okay, Jesus is going to come back and fix everything. It's Jesus is with us now, and he's giving us this tool so that we can prosper, have families, and spread his name throughout the earth. There's no more there's no doom and gloom anymore. There's a bright future. Be happy, rejoice. Like there's just more optimism.
It's amazing. And you said something with participating in fiat is evil. And I totally understand and totally agree also with that. Do you also see, and it's a random question, but do you see when you take out a loan in fiat and buy Bitcoin with that, is that also evil? Like Micah said,
Um,
doing it, I
no,
think Cypher Dynamus is also talking about that, even in the fiat standard, I think. Would
yeah,
that be considered evil?
that's a great question. And there's certain trusted people where we can discuss this, and in my life, and there's certain others who just don't get it. There's several people I know in my own personal life who even go to my church who took out huge loans at the bottom and bought tons of Bitcoin, and they are doing great now. Now, when they said, "Hey, Pastor, I took out X amount of money, and I bought a ton of Bitcoin when it was at like 20K," I was like, "Okay, you know the risk. Do whatever." Is it immoral? Here's the thing: the whole system is immoral. Okay, taking out debt to buy Bitcoin. What's the difference between taking out debt to buy Bitcoin or taking out debt to buy a house? What's the difference? They're both, I mean, a house is considered an asset. Maybe it shouldn't be, but it is. So you take out a loan, you buy a house, you take out a loan, you buy Bitcoin. What's the difference? I don't see a difference. Some people who don't understand Bitcoin will say, well, that's risky. Well, that's a risk you're taking on. And if that's a risk that you're willing to take on, okay. You could buy a house and lose your job. And then what? Everything is risk. Every time you take out debt, it's a risk. So I don't see it as an immoral thing to do. You're shorting the dollar, and those who have done that are doing well thus far. But again, it is a risk. And if that's part of your risk profile, go for it. If I was a single guy with no wife, no kids, I would have done that 100%.
21 Bitcoin is Bitcoin only from day one, and they teach and preach self-custody. This is my go-to exchange when someone asks me, oh, where can I buy my Bitcoin from? This is the easiest entry for Bitcoiners. And if you want lower fees, plus at the same time support this podcast, use code Robin and click the link in the description. I also tried it just for fun. I did it with a really small amount just to try, and it was interesting because it's not as easy as it seems to get a loan if your bank account is full of Bitcoin transactions. Because you have to give them your bank account, and mine was just like money coming in, going out on the Bitcoin exchange. Like this was it.
My,
So
my friend who did this, I don't know, maybe it's different where you live, but in Canada, he said it was easy. He has good credit. They offered him like, hey, we'll give you X amount. He thought, okay. They didn't even ask him what he was using it for. The lady asked him, just as in passing, hey, what are you gonna do with all this money? He said, go on vacation, whatever. Just said whatever. He wasn't gonna tell them buy Bitcoin because it could have raised flags, right? But I'll probably go on vacation, do something nice for myself.
but that's funny when you say, oh, I took a bunch of money and to go on a holiday is better to taking out a bunch of money to buy an asset. Like that in itself is like the holiday should raise red flags and not buying an asset. This should not
Right,
raise
right.
red flags. This is
I know.
that's funny. Yeah. Coming back to Christianity and Bitcoin, when you meet and I think I'm really deeply convinced that different people need a different explanation of Bitcoin. That's why I have this mission to bring 300 Bitcoiners onto the podcast this year, which is a crazy goal because this means I have to do at least 6 podcast recordings a week. But it's important so we get all the different views in one channel, and I just want to do this. I think I'm on a mission this year for doing this. And when we now come to Christianity, and I think you're the one of the best person to do that, how can we deeply convinced person in Christianity that says Bitcoin is just a scam convinced of Bitcoin? Like, how can we explain Bitcoin to someone who gets Christianity but not Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's the question I'm trying to answer all the time. Excuse me. Well, I wrote the book for that reason, The Bible and Bitcoin. It's very short on purpose because I didn't want to overwhelm people, and it was written specifically for Christians. I've found success with Christians by showing them the moral side of it. Like, some Christians will come and say, "Oh, it's a Ponzi scheme," or it's a scam or whatever. And it's really easy. Whenever someone tells you Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, you just ask them, "Do you hold dollars?" Yes. Well, let's go through the system that gives us dollars. It's very easy to demonstrate that's actually a Ponzi scheme. And most Christians I talk to are not too fond of the government, at least anymore, because of COVID and the different things that happen here in Canada. And so it's very easy to well, okay, so who do you trust? Who do you trust more, the government or a math protocol? Well, it's a no-brainer, right? So for believers, I just like to show them, look, it's a honest, sound system built on biblical principles of you shall not steal, equal weights and measures, honesty, integrity, no trust needed. At that point, the ball's in their court. You have a choice now. You know fiat money is immoral, and you know Bitcoin is apolitical. So what are you going to choose?
Yeah. Was this the reason also you wrote the book to Orange Pill Christians? Or
Yeah.
did something else also inspire or motivate you?
No, it was basically just the orange pill Christians because I had a good amount of Christians asking me about it. And it was just like, oh my gosh, I can't spend all day doing this. So I wrote the book as a way to just say, hey, read this and then we could talk after. Just as a way to multiply, almost as a way to multiply myself, so that I can't be everywhere at once. And so I wrote the book just as a way to be able to, and for Christians too, to be able to just hand it to their pastors or priests or whatever and say, hey, because a lot of Christians are messaging me saying, how do I talk to my pastor? How do I talk to my priest? How do I talk to, the board at church about Bitcoin? I don't know how to do it. And I wrote the book for that too. He's like, well, get a book and just hand it to them and say, hey, it's a short book. Will you read this? And then we could talk about it. And most people who've messaged me have had success with that strategy. It's easier than trying to bring it up, hey, go to your pastor. Hey, man, I want to have a meeting with you. Let's spend an hour talking about Bitcoin. Sometimes these guys, they don't want to hear it, whatever. If you give them a little book, it's a lot easier to do that than to try to push it,
Yeah, it's so much easier. And I think orange pilling in general, you have like if there's no interest from the person coming that he does not want to get Bitcoin, I think it's really hard to get the interest going in him. It depends on what relationship you have with him, but most of the time it's really hard to get that interest going. So it should be like some intrinsic motivation, some intrinsic interest, and most of the time it comes from just number graph technology. You see it, as you said yourself, every 4 years, these crazy cycles are coming up. And you're like, oh, wow, it shoots up to 20,000. You're like, oh, shit, I'm dumb. I did not get in. Then it shoots down to 3,000. You're like, oh, I'm so clever. I did not get in. And then it shoots up back to 69,000. Oh, shit, I'm so stupid. And if you live through 1, 2, 3 cycles, all of a sudden you're like, so what is this thing actually? So you
Yeah,
start questioning those things, and I think this interest is starting more and more also in the mainstream, because with every cycle there are some Bitcoiners sticking to it, like some that are just coming in and getting out, they are just leaving again, and maybe they're coming back in the next cycle, but some are actually sticking with it, and they're like, oh, this is the thing, this is what I should put my financial energy in. And another question, like the different way now, when you think of Bitcoiner, and I think a lot of Bitcoiner are actually Christians, but there are also a lot of other religions, and there are probably also a lot of Bitcoiners that don't believe in anything. So, except maybe Satoshi Nakamoto or the white paper. Do you think Bitcoiners in general have the values of Christianity? Do they have the potential to be Christian?
Yeah, I see this a lot where I got a message today from somebody actually who was saying, "Oh, got into Bitcoin and next thing I know, I'm in church and I'm being baptized and I'm a Christian." And when I first became a Bitcoiner, I found that strange. I'm like, "What's going on here?" Because excuse me. I came from Christianity to Bitcoin. So for me it wasn't, you know, there was no spiritual experience. It was just like, okay, Bitcoin, I understand it. Oh, wow, it makes sense. It fits with my worldview. Okay, let's go. But some people, they get into Bitcoin and they have this spiritual experience. They become Christians. And I thought, well, that's so strange. What is going on here? Why is this happening? It's not just one or two people. It's like tons of people are telling me. Some people, they move to El Salvador and then they become Christians. I'm like, what's going on? And I think the reason for this is because a lot of people who grow up outside of Christianity, they never had an experience with objective truth. And Bitcoin, for a lot of them, is that first experience where they encounter this thing that is just objectively true, does not care about anything else. It just does what it does truthfully every time, period. It's an objective truth protocol. And when people encounter that, it changes them, because if you've never had an encounter with an objective truth, it can become like a spiritual experience. And so when they realize, oh goodness, there is a excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold, so forgive my cough. There is objective truth here. Well, where else is there objective truth? And then you go down the rabbit hole and you end with God, and you go, wow, okay, it all makes sense now. The way I understand Bitcoin is a layer 2 technology on God's layer 1 technology. God, being the infinite creator who's outside of time, outside of space, he's not bound by it, created time and space. Therefore, he created math. God coded the universe, and the language he uses is math. And on top of that layer 1, Bitcoin's built layer 2, math protocol. So that's how I understand the universe. God creates it, he codes it. It says he said, he speaks. God's language is math. He creates it, he codes it, he runs the program. It's the universe. We come along as his image, and what do? We take God's layer 1 technology and we build a layer 2 on top of it. This is Bitcoin. So that's the experience. That's what I think happens with people when they get into Bitcoin. Now, of course, there's atheists who are Bitcoin and other worldviews who are into Bitcoin as well. But I would argue that they are still standing on God's layer 1, whether or not they believe it or not. They're standing on God's layer 1 and using this layer 2 technology that's built on top of it.
Yeah, it's like when people, and I often see this, like Bitcoin will eat itself into the whole economy. So even though people might not want it, or even though people might not see it, they will use Bitcoin on the back end. There
Yeah.
will be so many applications, there will be so many things that will be built on top of Bitcoin that they don't even know that they are using Bitcoin, like
Yeah.
actual Bitcoin in the background. Even like if you buy an S&P 500, you're buying indirectly Bitcoin because Tesla is in the S&P 500 and Tesla is buying Bitcoin. Not a lot.
Mhm.
And this will probably increase once MicroStrategy and maybe other companies go into S&P 500 and have an aggressive Bitcoin strategy, but they don't know it. Like
Right.
how many people are in the
Pension
S&P 500?
funds. How many pension funds are going to buy Bitcoin?
Yeah.
And the people, they don't know, they're putting money in their pension fund and it's actually going into Bitcoin, some of it.
This will be so huge. Bitcoin ETF allowed for all that to happen. And do you have an opinion on the Bitcoin ETF from your point of view of like from the Bible point of view?
I think I don't know if it's necessarily a biblical point of view. I just think this was going to happen eventually. Um, it's part of the process. It's a step for Bitcoin. Um, I mean, you couldn't stop it. It's going to happen. How it plays out in the end, I don't know. I tend to think like you, Bitcoin's going to eat up the economy. And I see Bitcoin more as a Trojan horse. Maybe ETF issuers think we can co-opt it, but what I think is going to end up happening is Bitcoin's going to co-opt them. They've let the animal in. It's too late. You can't control this thing. So that's how I see it playing out. I think the ETF has some, in this point in history, some legitimate use cases. Like, for example, my wife is a nurse. She got fired from her job for not taking the ouchie Fauci. And so her pension was released to her to invest herself. Well, what did we do? Bitcoin ETF, right? No brainer. So now her pension is outperforming by a big margin. her previous employer's pension fund. So she was able to get into Bitcoin before her employer's pension fund allocates to it, which they will eventually. So it was a blessing in disguise, right? So I see. So she can't uh, realize those gains until she's 55. So it's locked in. So well, what do you do in that case? Well, you use the Bitcoin ETF, right? That's the only thing that makes sense. So I see use cases like that. Outside of that, I don't know. I don't really see much of a use for it myself. Just get the real thing, self-custody. But in situations like that, I think it's a great option, and it's I'm happy it's available because now her pension is performing really well.
Yeah, so everybody will have Bitcoin in their pension plan. If you don't have it, I mean, I always say Bitcoin is your pension plan, but for people that are just slowly getting in or don't get it now, their pension planners will involve Bitcoin. At some point, if you don't include Bitcoin in your financial strategy, you will get fired as a financial planner.
Yeah.
There is this time coming, so it's very clear to me. Last question on the Bitcoin and Bible section. Do you see then the Bitcoin white paper as kind of a Bible? I mean, Bitcoin white paper is way smaller than the Bible and has it's a faster read and a different read. But do you see it kind of the Bible that guides Bitcoin?
Not really. I mean, if you take it literally, Bible means library, right? And the white paper is just one. If you want to call it a book, it's one book. So no, I don't really view it as a sort of a Bible or anything. It's just I just view it as a sort of excuse me. Like I said, Satoshi just released it. He didn't even know if this thing would work. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really think much about it, to be honest.
Yeah, interesting. That's it's like a library, so it would be like every Bitcoin book together would be then the Bible, kind of.
Maybe you take all Satoshi's message board posts, put them all in one book. Then maybe you
Every-
have a sort of a library, a Satoshi library. But yeah,
So I guess the Bitcoin Bible is still we still have to write it.
has to be compiled. We have to have a council where we determine which writings are authentic, which ones are
Yeah,
not.
something like that.
Yeah.
Perfect. Then before we get into our end routine of the podcast, what is like the most important message people, readers from your book and listeners to that podcast should take away? Like, what's your message you want to get out on this podcast or from your book?
Yeah, good question. The message I want to get out is really simple. That Jesus is risen from the dead. He really is, and he's giving us this tool, Bitcoin, in order to bless all people of the earth with a sound money. How many people are suffering in the world because of the fiat system? You live in the West, you're privileged. Okay, let's just face the facts. We live in a financial system that has tremendous privilege because we're closest to the money printer. But there's so many people in this world who are suffering, and the only reason they're suffering, not because they're lazy, not because they're stupid, they're suffering because the money they have is so inferior and broken that no matter how much they work, they're still poor. And the West is getting there. Fiat money always gets there. But I know people who come from Argentina who told me, man, we worked our butts off and they inflated so much it didn't matter. It didn't matter. Um, so my message is Jesus is giving us a tool to bring us back to the ancient ways in order for people to have a free and open economy where we can collaborate together to make a better world. And how this plays out from here, I don't know. I'm not a prophet. I can't tell you. But all I know is Christ is alive. He's given us his word. Go out and spread it. And I think Bitcoin is a tool. It's interesting because I think in the future, we won't have these conversations. There won't be like, hey, Christians, here's Bitcoin. It's honest money. You need to get. There's just going to be a time where this is going to be an irrelevant conversation because everyone will just use Bitcoin. So it's kind of strange for me to, kind of work these two things together. But this is the time we live in. So I think for the future of humanity, we need to have a good, sound money. And I think Christians, as people of God, should care about our neighbors enough to fight for this thing. And I like to call Bitcoin love your neighbor money because it's the money in the world that you can use that honors your neighbor and loves your neighbor and does not debase your neighbor's um, labor.
Yeah, and that's so true what you just said. Also, with we will not have these conversations in the future, and I also think like that because when we have Bitcoin as the base layer of our financial system, and this is what I write in all my bios, I will talk about Bitcoin till it's the base layer of our financial system. Because at this point, then it's boring.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
if it's everywhere and it's just a base layer, it's like talking about email protocols like the TCP/IP protocol. Of
Yeah.
course, it's fascinating technology, and we could talk about all day long how TCP/IP is the base layer of the internet and everything. But who cares? Like it's just normal. Like everybody uses TCP/IP, and this is what Bitcoin also will be. It will be boring. It will be in everyday's life, and it will be great to have. And yeah.
I think Bitcoin succeeds when no one talks about it, right? When Bitcoin succeeds when my great grandchildren look at this book and go, "Wow, I can't believe you had to write this." Like, you know, oh, that's crazy. Bitcoin succeeds when no one talks about it, when nobody cares about it, because this is what I think Bitcoin does. It, if Bitcoin succeeds, this is what it'll do in the world. It will give people back their time to do what's really important with their life. That's the whole point of a hard sound money standard, is so that human beings, the image of God, can use their time to do what's really important. Raise a family, build a church, serve their neighbors, help the sick, educate, people. Like, this is the important stuff in life. And we're having trouble with it because we're spending so much time trying to make money. We're chasing this money that continually becomes more and more worthless. So you have to spend more and more time, and now you're neglecting the important things. Bitcoin succeeds when no one talks about it and humans have more time to invest in the important things of life, like church, family, and things like that. That's when you know Bitcoin has succeeded.
Yeah, that's very true and very beautifully said. Do you have? I mean, that's impossible to predict, but do you have like an timeline where like, oh, it could happen in the next 10 years, or it could happen in the next 200 years? Do you have like an idea where this adoption will go and when we will be there?
I don't know. When you look at the adoption curve of other technologies, it tends to be, slow, 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 and then boom, it just happens. Like when I think about things like the cell phone, when I was a teenager, they were just coming out, the flip phones and all that, and the texting. I remember you had the number pad, and it took so long to send a text message. And my girlfriend, who's now my wife, she would send text messages, and I'm like, "How do you do that? There's 3 letters per number. I'm confused. I don't know how to do this. It's too much work." But within 5 years, 10 years, everybody's sending text messages. Everyone's doing this thing. My dad told me, "Oh, cell phones, that'll never catch on. That's stupid. Who wants to carry a phone everywhere they go?" Right? Like, what are you going to do? You're going to call me when I'm at the grocery store? I don't want to talk to you. I want to go get so this is the kind of, but now he has a cell phone. He has Facebook. He's doing the texting. He's doing the FaceTime. So it's going to happen, I think, quick. When that suddenly happens, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But be prepared because it's going to go slow, 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 and then boom.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of but there are a lot of studies on that, and they study about how the internet got adopted, how electricity got adopted, how everything got adopted. And usually it's like you need a long time for the first 10%. You need like 10, 15 years for the first 10%. In the same time you adopt the first 10%, you get the next 80% to the 90% of adoption. So
Mhm.
we are now at around about 10%. Depends on how you calculate adoption, and what a Bitcoiner is and who adopted Bitcoin. But we are getting close to that number. And a lot of people argue that it's happened in 2020 where we got to 10%. I think we're not quite there yet. So this inflection point could happen really soon. And it will surprise a lot of people in 15, 20 years how fast and how tremendous this technology changed our lives. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's what I think, and there are a lot of studies on numbers backing those claims. But the important thing is it will continue, and with every bull cycle, it's a little bit faster to that future.
Yeah. And there's of course there's a learning curve, but there's a learning curve with every technology. Like the personal computer. The first time I got a personal computer for Christmas, a Hewlett Packard, big clunky. The monitor weighed 50 pounds. But I was so fascinated by it. I was like, wow, you can. I remember going to Napster. Remember Napster? I don't know how old you are, but you go
No.
to Napster and you could download music, and it was like, whoa! You could just put in, whatever music, Rage Against the Machine, and boom, you could download it. It was revolutionary. Of course, they got sued by Metallica and all that kind of. But anyways, um, yeah. So this thing's gonna happen very quickly, and I just tell people like, you just be ready for it because when it happens, um, it's gonna happen quick. And the like what was I gonna say? Anyways, I forgot. Maybe I'll remember.
Uh, and it's definitely we could even now be at the start of this super cycle that will
Hmm.
bring something like, I think we have now publicly traded companies in the cycles since 2020 with MicroStrategy, now 80 or something like that companies followed. We have countries with El Salvador and other countries that are getting more and more friendly to Bitcoin, others not so, but we're getting more and more into that. And then we have now the Bitcoin ETF. We have so much going now for Bitcoin that this could actually be the inflection point where we are going on a crazy journey. I mean, Michael Saylor talked about this at the Bitcoin Atlantis, that we are now in a 10-year gold rush to Bitcoin.
Hmm.
And it
Hmm.
could very well happen, and it will be extremely interesting to see the next few years. And I just suggest to everyone, don't be on the sidelines, and really, really get into that revolution that is just now happening.
So I remember what I was gonna say. What I was gonna say was when you use Bitcoin, it is very different at first. You got to learn, but once you figure it out and you use it a little bit, my experience has been when you go back to the bank, it's so frustrating. When I go to the bank now, I feel like I'm using a fax machine or a typewriter. I'm going in there and I'm like, man, this is so inefficient. This system sucks. It's so old and garbage and slow and it's just not good. So when you use Bitcoin, and at first you're, well, this is different. Why would it work this way? But then you use it and you figure out, you go, well, this is actually quite easy, efficient, trustworthy. And then you go to the bank and you go, wow, this system sucks. I owe a friend of mine. I owe them $100. They bought me something from the States, and it's almost like, dude, just figure out Bitcoin because I could just pay you back like this. But now I have to go to the bank, take out the cash, give it to like, oh, guys, get with the program. This fiat system is so boring and slow and not efficient. So when you start to use Bitcoin, then it's almost like I can't go back. It's like sending an email and then someone saying, write me a letter and put it in the postage. It's like, well, just get an email address and I can send you the information. Imagine if people were like that. If they said, look, I don't have an email address. If you want to send me a note, you got to write it on paper, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and go put it in the box. That's what I feel like using the bank now. I feel like I'm going to the post office to send you a letter.
And I think I don't remember who said it, but was it Andreas Antonopoulos who said our kids will not use. It depends, of course, how old your kids are, and my kids are not on this earth right now, so they will come. Our kids will not use the banking system, and they will not be like, what is this? And it's kind of like when you were talking about letters and stamps. I never sent a letter. I would not even know how to do it. I have no clue how to send a letter. The only thing I did is sending back Amazon packages. that's the most physical thing I do, and I rarely do this because I don't buy stuff that I don't need it. I only send it back if it's like damaged or something. Even that I rarely do. So writing a letter is so strange for me, and I think banks and this whole fiat system will be for some generations, and depends on the timing, what generation that will be so strange to them. Like, what is this? Why do I have to wait 3 business days to get wire transfer done? Why can I not transfer money on a Saturday? Like,
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
happening? I just want to send you money. I can do this over WhatsApp. Like, why could you not do this? So this will be a massive.
Or asking for permission. That's my favorite one. You go in, oh, can I get some money? Well, what do you need it for? What do you mean?
It's my money.
Just give it to me. Like, why? You gotta. I think KYC, these hardcore KYC requirements, I hope for my children will be strange. Like, well, you have to give them your driver's license before you open an account. Like, what?
Yeah, that would definitely be strange, because a Bitcoin account you can just open. You just need a phone with an internet connection. You're like, oh, perfect. And there even I had an African Bitcoiner on that provides a service. I forgot how it's called. That allows you to send and receive Bitcoin with just a phone number. They are providing a centralized service where you can just provide a phone number and send Bitcoin to them, and they have like a wallet. And this is like something amazing, because there are people without an internet connection. There are
Mm-hmm.
more people with an internet connection in the phone than there are banked people. So we are
Yeah.
already above that potential, but still there are people without an internet connection that don't have that luxury. And even for those people, there are services that they can use Bitcoin. It's an amazing thing. Yeah. And we are having an end routine in the podcast, where the previous guest asked a question for the next guest. And this question is completely unrelated to anything we talked about today. It's completely unrelated also to Bitcoin. I don't know if you even have an opinion on that. When do you think will we colonize Mars?
Um, I don't know. I hope never. Uh, because if we do, then my assumption is we screwed up Earth. um, so I hope it gets to a point where humans can collaborate peacefully together to such a degree that we don't want to leave.
Yeah.
So my hope is never, but who knows?
This is what I love about those ending questions, because I don't tell the guest who's the next guest. So the questions are completely random, and sometimes they are suiting really well, sometimes they are suiting not at all. But it's always something new, and I did that because, like, I tailor questions and topics for the guest. So if the other one is also tailoring a question for the next guest, then it's like, it's the same. So it's an interesting concept. Pastor Alin, it was amazing to have you on. You have really, really cool insights into the whole topic with Bitcoin and the Bible. I loved your opinions on that, and I hope we can talk in the future more. Before I send you off, where can people get in touch with you? Where can people ask you questions the best way?
Best way is to just go to Twitter at Pastorcoin. I'm on there most times. DM me, whatever. Just get in contact, and yeah, I'd be happy to chat.
Perfect. Thank you for being on.
Thank you. Appreciate it.